The room behind the wall, what I found shouldn't exist. I moved into a cheap apartment last month, the kind of place you find when you're desperate to save money and don't ask too many questions. It was an old building, the kind with warped wooden floors and walls thin enough to hear your neighbors sneeze. The landlord seemed eager to rent it out, and I wasn't about to argue. Affordable apartments are rare in this city. Everything was fine at first. The place was small but cozy, with a single bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and a bathroom that always smelled faintly of mildew no matter how much I cleaned. The only odd thing was the layout. The hallway to the bedroom seemed longer than it should be. I chalked it up to bad design and didn't think much of it. The first strange thing happened on my third night there. I was lying in bed when I heard footsteps. They were soft, faint, but unmistakable, slow and deliberate, moving down the hallway. My heart raced. I lived alone. Gripping my phone like a weapon, I crept to the door and peeked out. The hallway was empty. The only sound was the hum of the fridge in the kitchen. I convinced myself it was just the building settling or a neighbor upstairs. But over the next few nights, the footsteps continued. They always started in the hallway, stopping just outside my bedroom door before fading away. No matter how fast I opened the door, I never saw anyone. By the end of the first week, I started to notice something else, a faint draft coming from the hallway. It didn't make sense. None of the windows were open, and the apartment wasn't big enough for hidden vents. The draft was strongest near the left wall, where the paint was cracked and peeling. One night, curiosity got the better of me. I knocked on the wall, half expecting it to be solid. Instead, the sound was hollow. My stomach dropped. There was something behind that wall. The next morning, I called the landlord. He sounded annoyed when I brought it up. "It's just an old building," he said. "Things shift. Don't go poking around where you don't belong." The way he said it sent a chill down my spine. I decided not to push the issue, but I couldn't stop thinking about that hollow sound. That night, I woke up to the footsteps again, louder this time. They stopped outside my door, but this time, they didn't fade away. Instead, I heard a faint tapping on the wall. My breath caught. Someone or something was tapping from the other side. The next day, I bought a small hammer and chisel. I waited until after midnight, when the building was quiet, and started chipping away at the cracked paint. The plaster behind it crumbled easily, revealing old, rotting wood. My hands were shaking as I pried the boards loose, one by one, until I uncovered a doorway. The air that spilled out was icy and smelled of damp earth. My flashlight barely penetrated the darkness, but I could see the edge of a small, empty room. The walls were lined with old, yellowed wallpaper, and the floor was covered in dust so thick it muffled the sound of my steps. There was no furniture, no signs of life. Just a single window on the far wall. Though it didn't lead outside, it opened into nothing but blackness. As I stood there trying to make sense of what I was seeing, I noticed something strange. The dust on the floor wasn't undisturbed. Faint footprints led from the window to the doorway, where I now stood. They weren't mine. A sound made me freeze. A soft, creaking groan, like wood under pressure. It was coming from the window. Slowly, the darkness beyond it began to shift, taking shape. A pale, elongated face pressed against the glass, its features distorted and wrong. Hollow eyes locked onto mine, and a mouth too wide stretched into a grin. I stumbled back, my flashlight clattering to the floor. The thing on the other side of the window began to move, pressing its hands against the glass as though testing its strength. The room seemed to grow colder with each passing second, and I could hear faint whispers all around me, overlapping and echoing. I ran. I fled the apartment and didn't stop until I was in my car, shaking and gasping for air. I spent the night in a cheap motel, trying to convince myself it was a nightmare. The next morning, I went back to the building, determined to confront the landlord. When I arrived, the front door was locked, and the windows were boarded up. A neighbor walking by noticed me staring. "Looking for someone?" she asked. "The landlord," and I said. "I live here." Her face turned pale. You live there?" She glanced at the building, her expression shifting to something between fear and pity. "That place has been abandoned for years. The landlord disappeared a long time ago, and no one's rented it since." I didn't believe her at first. I still had my keys after all, but when I tried to unlock the door, the key didn't fit. The building looked older, more decayed, as though it had been untouched for decades. I left without another word. I haven't been back since, but sometimes late at night I hear the footsteps again. And when I close my eyes, I see that face pressed against the glass, grinning at me from the darkness.